Humanity had been broken. The great empires of the galaxy saw Earth as nothing more than a resource farm, a world filled with weak primitives who had barely reached the stars. The moment humanity made contact, they were given no chance to negotiate, no opportunity to prove themselves. Instead, the Galactic Dominion descended upon Earth with overwhelming force. Within weeks the planet fell, millions were slaughtered and billions were enslaved. Shackles of plasma and chains of gravity binders ensured no human could resist. Entire generations were born in servitude, never knowing freedom. On the industrial worlds of the Dominion, humans were worked to death in mines, factories, and war foundries. Their adaptability, endurance, and stubborn refusal to die made them valuable slaves, but among them there was something the overlords did not anticipate, a spark of defiance that no amount of pain or suffering could extinguish. The Dominion did not know it, but the first seeds of their downfall had already been sown. In the pits of Zephyr Prime, where the air was thick with metallic dust and the screams of the dying were ignored, a man named Daniel Voss emerged as a leader. He was born in chains, but something burned inside him that the Dominion could not break. He had seen his mother executed for collapsing from exhaustion, his father torn apart by Dominion enforcers, but instead of surrendering to despair, he remembered their faces, he remembered their pain, and he vowed that one day humanity would be free. Daniel was not the only one. Others across the Dominion's vast empire had begun whispering of rebellion. Secret messages were passed between work shifts, knowledge was shared in the dark corners of slave barracks, weapons were smuggled piece by piece until entire stockpiles were formed. There were humans in every corner of the Dominion, mines, factories, shipyards, even the military supply chains. The Dominion had turned humanity into the backbone of their empire, and that was their greatest mistake. On a distant outpost, a scientist named Dr. Elaine Carter uncovered something the overlords had missed. The Dominion had suppressed human innovation, limiting their access to technology and education, but even with these restrictions, humans had begun to understand the secrets of the galaxy. Elaine had spent years in the archives studying Dominion technology in secret until finally she discovered something. The Dominion's core systems relied on a single network, an ancient control system that could be exploited. Daniel and Elaine's paths crossed when whispers of rebellion reached her. She had a plan, a way to strike at the heart of the Dominion, but they needed more than just knowledge. They needed an army, they needed weapons, they needed time. Daniel took the first step. He led the first successful uprising in the slave pits of Zephyr Prime. It was a bloodbath, but for the first time in centuries humans fought back and won. They seized control of a Dominion outpost, stealing weapons and ships. It was the first battle, but it would not be the last. Word spread like wildfire across the Dominion slave networks. Other groups saw the impossible become possible. Hope, once buried under the weight of oppression, ignited into a storm of defiance. Humans on mining worlds sabotaged production workers in shipyards, rigged Dominion vessels with traps. Those forced into military service turned their weapons on their masters. The Dominion responded with overwhelming force. They sent execution fleets to purge rebellious worlds. They burned entire colonies, but with every atrocity they committed, they only strengthened humanity's resolve. They could kill millions, but they could not erase the idea that had taken root. Daniel and Elaine knew they had to move fast before the Dominion could crush them completely. Their forces were still too weak to take on the Empire head-on, so they struck where it hurt the most. Dominion supply lines, the slave workforce that kept their war machine running, turned against them. Suddenly key warships had no fuel, weapon foundries went silent, shipyards collapsed under the weight of sabotage. What had once been an empire built on human labor was now crumbling under its own weight. The Dominion had never faced an enemy like this before. Enemies could be crushed, battles could be won, but how do you fight against those who were never meant to fight, those who refuse to surrender, those who have nothing left to lose? The rebellion was no longer a whisper, it was a storm, and the galaxy would soon know that humanity was not born to serve, it was born to conquer. The Dominion could no longer ignore the growing rebellion. What had started as scattered uprisings had turned into something more coordinated, more dangerous. Supply lines were collapsing, entire shipyards had gone silent, and Dominion war fleets were now forced to defend their own infrastructure. Instead of expanding their reach, humanity was no longer just resisting, they were taking control. Daniel Voss stood at the command deck of the first human-controlled warship, a stolen Dominion dreadnought reprogrammed and modified by Elaine Carter and her team. It was a marvel of engineering, proof that humanity could not only fight back but master the very technology that had enslaved them for centuries. This ship would be the beginning, but it would not be the end. Across the Dominion's vast empire, humans were rising, the mines of Zephyr Prime, the factories of Zarthos, the deep space refineries of the Halbrand system. These once hopeless labor camps were now strongholds of rebellion. The Dominion tried to respond with overwhelming force, but every attack only fueled the flames. Humans had learned, they adapted. Every massacre, every purge only created more warriors, more leaders, more fanatics willing to die for the cause. Elaine's breakthrough was the key. The Dominion's network was ancient, built upon technology so old and complex that even they had lost full control of it. Through relentless study, she and her team had found weaknesses, backdoors, places where a coordinated strike could cripple the Empire. Daniel knew what had to be done. They had to take the battle to the Dominion's core worlds. It was suicide. No one had ever breached the Dominion's central sectors, their military command, their ruling elite. All were protected behind layers of defense fleets, planetary shields, and fortified strongholds. But Daniel saw something else, a weakness in their arrogance. The Dominion had never faced an enemy that truly understood them because they had never allowed any of their slaves to learn and think for themselves. Now that mistake would cost them everything. With stolen ships and repurposed Dominion weapons, humanity launched its first coordinated offensive. The attack came without warning. Rebellion forces emerged from hidden bases, striking deep into Dominion-controlled space. Warp lanes were cut off, communications disrupted, industrial hubs sabotaged, entire Dominion fleets were lost without supply lines. Their warships, built to crush inferior species, were now turning into lifeless hulks drifting in space. The first major victory came at Draven's Rift, a key refueling station for the Dominion war machine. What was supposed to be a routine stop for a Dominion fleet turned into a massacre. The humans had already infiltrated the station. Workers, once slaves, had turned it into a death trap. Fuel lines detonated, warships burned before they could even activate their defenses. The Dominion fleet that had once ruled this sector was reduced to wreckage in hours. With every battle, more of the galaxy took notice. Other species long crushed under Dominion rule saw something they had never dared to believe. The Dominion was not invincible. The impossible was happening. Slaves were not only fighting back, they were winning. But the Dominion was not finished. Faced with a rebellion they could not contain, the ruling elite gathered to make a decision. A new strategy would be needed. This was no longer just a rebellion, this was a war, and the Dominion did not intend to lose. The Dominion could no longer pretend the rebellion was a minor disturbance. Their empire, built on the backs of enslaved species, was crumbling from within. What had once been dismissed as scattered uprisings had transformed into a coordinated war effort, and the humans were proving to be far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Daniel Voss stood aboard the bridge of the stolen Dominion dreadnought, now refitted with human modifications. He looked at the tactical displays showing the latest victories. Dominion supply routes were shattered, key shipyards had been seized, and even some Dominion-controlled species had begun whispering of rebellion. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The Dominion still had the numbers, still had fleets powerful enough to wipe out entire planets. If humanity was going to win, they had to deliver a decisive blow. Elaine Carter had spent months decoding the ancient Dominion network, mapping weaknesses in their infrastructure. That was when she found it. The Dominion's entire command structure relied on a central AI, an ancient construct built long before the current ruling elite had taken power. If they could infiltrate and disable it, the entire Dominion war machine would collapse, but getting to it would be nearly impossible. The AI core was located deep within the Dominion's throne world of Vatos Prime, a planet so heavily fortified that no fleet had ever breached its defenses. Even approaching it would mean facing entire armadas, planetary shields, and orbital defenses designed to annihilate anything that dared to come close. A direct assault was suicide, but Daniel had no intention of launching a conventional attack. The plan was set: infiltration rather than brute force. Elaine and her team would be inserted onto Vatos Prime disguised as slave laborers. Meanwhile, the human-controlled fleets would launch a diversionary assault, drawing Dominion forces away from the core worlds. Daniel would lead the fleet himself, knowing full well it could be a one-way mission, but if they succeeded, if the AI core was destroyed, the Dominion's fleets would lose coordination, their communications would break down, and their empire would begin to collapse from the inside. As the fleet prepared for battle, Daniel addressed his people: humans of the rebellion, we were born into chains, we were told we were weak, we were told we were nothing, and now we stand on the edge of victory. We do not fight for revenge, we fight for a future where no human will ever kneel again. The battle began. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace, striking key Dominion outposts with pinpoint precision. Capital ships burned, the void filled with wreckage as human forces hit harder than the Dominion expected, but this was only a distraction. The real mission was already underway. Elaine and her team had landed on Vatos Prime, hidden among newly arrived slave workers. Using stolen Dominion codes, they bypassed security, slipping deeper into the city-sized fortress that housed the AI core. Every step was a risk. The Dominion had no idea that their greatest enemy was walking right through their gates. Above the planet, the battle intensified. The Dominion finally recognized the true threat and deployed its largest fleets to crush the humans. Daniel knew they couldn't hold out forever. He pushed his forces to the limit, leading charge after charge, forcing the Dominion to focus entirely on the fleet. Every second they bought increased Elaine's chances of success. Deep underground, Elaine reached the AI core, a structure unlike anything built in the last 1,000 years. It pulsed with an eerie light, data streaming through ancient circuits designed to control entire star systems. The Dominion had relied on this machine for centuries, never imagining it could be touched. Elaine activated the virus, a creation of human ingenuity and desperation. The AI core's defenses fought back, shutting doors, activating security drones, but it was too late. The virus spread through the network, corrupting data, severing connections. Entire Dominion warships lost power mid-battle. Planetary defenses shut down. Soldiers suddenly found themselves without orders or coordination. The effect was immediate across the galaxy. Dominion-controlled fleets went dark. The carefully maintained chain of command shattered. Dominion warlords panicked. Entire sectors fell into chaos. The invincible empire was collapsing. But the fight was not over. The AI core had one final failsafe, a planetary self-destruction protocol. Vatos Prime was rigged to detonate, taking Elaine and her team with it. If the Dominion could not have their empire, they would burn it all to the ground. Elaine sent a desperate message to Daniel. The mission was a success, but they were trapped, and Vatos Prime was about to become a funeral pyre. Daniel Voss stood aboard the bridge of his warship, watching the Dominion fleet collapse before his eyes. Their once invincible armadas drifted aimlessly, their command structure shattered, their mighty war machine reduced to chaos. The virus Elaine had deployed had worked beyond expectations, but the cost was about to be catastrophic. Elaine's message came through filled with static, but the urgency was clear. The AI core was destroyed, but Vatos Prime was on the verge of self-destruction. The Dominion's final act of spite was to turn their throne world into a planetary bomb, one that would take Elaine, her team, and millions of enslaved humans with it. Daniel didn't hesitate. The battle around Vatos Prime was still raging, but he gave the order all ships capable of landing were to begin emergency evacuation of the surface. They didn't have long. The Dominion's failsafe had already begun countdown, and the planet was tearing itself apart. Elaine and her team were trapped deep within the fortress. The AI's destruction had caused cascading failures, entire sections collapsing, security systems going haywire. With every step they were forced to fight automated defenses, drones still following protocols despite their masters being powerless above them. The hulls shook as explosions rippled through the core of the planet. Time was running out. Above in orbit, Daniel's forces faced a desperate battle. Dominion remnants had realized what was happening. Despite their losses, they had regrouped just enough to launch a counterattack. They would rather see the planet burn and take the humans with it than let them escape. The human fleet found itself under siege as it tried to evacuate survivors. Daniel made a choice. He would not abandon them. He took direct control of the fleet's largest dreadnought, leading an assault straight through the Dominion blockade. Buying time for the evacuation was the only thing that mattered. The battle turned brutal. Dominion warships rammed into human vessels, desperate to stop them, but Daniel refused to retreat. They had come too far. On the surface, Elaine's team finally reached the outer corridors of the fortress, only to find their exit blocked. The Dominion's final defense, a planetary shield, still stood. If they didn't bring it down, no one was escaping. Vatos Prime. Elaine pushed forward, hacking through Dominion control systems, overriding safeties as explosions ripped through the city. Finally, she found the main control hub, guarded by the last of the Dominion's enforcers. Unlike the mindless drones, these warriors had chosen to stay, fighting to the last breath to defend their crumbling empire. The battle was fierce. Humans armed with stolen Dominion weapons fought in the burning corridors, blaster fire cutting through the darkness. Elaine worked frantically as her people held the line, fingers flying over control panels, disabling layers of security systems. The shield flickered, then fell. Above, Daniel saw his chance. The moment the planetary shield collapsed, he ordered all evacuation ships to dive into the chaos. Shuttles raced to the surface, loading as many survivors as possible, but the countdown was nearing its final seconds. Vatos Prime was dying. Elaine and her remaining team sprinted to the final evacuation point. Dominion forces were in full retreat, their empire collapsing around them, but there was no victory yet. The ground beneath them cracked, entire city sections falling into fire and molten rock. The last shuttle was waiting, engines primed, ready to leave. She made it aboard just as the world gave its final shudder. The moment the ramp closed, the shuttle blasted into the sky, leaving behind the burning ruins of the Dominion's throne world. The last command center of their once mighty empire vanished in an explosion so bright it outshined the stars. The human fleet jumped away just in time as Vatos Prime detonated in a catastrophic eruption that sent shockwaves across the system. The heart of the Dominion was gone. Silence fell over the fleet. Survivors, both human and former slaves, stared at the viewports, watching the remains of their greatest enemy drift into the void. The war was not over, but the turning point had come. For the first time in history, humanity was not running, humanity was not kneeling, humanity was rising. The destruction of Vatos Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Dominion's Central Command was obliterated, its core leadership either dead or in hiding. The AI system that had once coordinated their vast empire was gone, leaving their fleets scattered and directionless. Entire sectors erupted into chaos as Dominion governors, warlords and military leaders turned on each other, scrambling to seize what little power remained. But humanity was not done. The rebellion had become an army, and that army was now marching toward total victory. Daniel Voss stood aboard the bridge of his warship, watching incoming reports from across Dominion space. Slave uprisings were spreading faster than the Dominion could contain them. Formerly oppressed species were seizing control of their own worlds. Dominion fleets, now leaderless and fractured, were either being destroyed or defecting in desperation. Humanity had gone from slaves to revolutionaries, and now they were becoming conquerors. Elaine Carter and her team were already working on the next phase. With the Dominion's network crippled, they had an opportunity to strike a final decisive blow. The Dominion still had massive fleets, still controlled vast territories, but they were vulnerable. Without a unified command structure, they could not coordinate a defense. Elaine's plan was simple: take the fight to the last remaining Dominion strongholds before they could recover, before another leader could rise to unite them. The rebellion's forces were still outnumbered, but they had something the Dominion never expected: strategy, adaptability, ruthlessness. Daniel and Elaine led the charge. Fleet after fleet fell as Dominion worlds were liberated or destroyed. Those who surrendered were given a choice: join humanity or be erased. Entire Dominion governors surrendered outright, realizing they no longer had the strength to resist. Others chose to fight to the bitter end, refusing to accept that the species they once ruled had become their executioners. On the world of Carvos, a Dominion fortress world that had once housed the largest human labor camps, Daniel led an orbital assault that shattered its defenses within hours. The surviving Dominion forces pleaded for mercy, but Daniel had not forgotten the atrocities committed there. Millions of humans had died in the mines of Carvos, their bodies burned in mass graves. Daniel gave the order: no prisoners. Carvos burned. The message was clear: humanity would show no mercy to those who had enslaved them for centuries. The Dominion had never granted them mercy when they were weak. Now that humanity was strong, there would be no forgiveness. Not everyone in the rebellion agreed. Some human leaders hesitated, worried that their people were becoming as brutal as their former masters, but Daniel had no patience for weakness. This was a war of survival. There would be no peace until the Dominion was erased from history. Elaine focused on the final Dominion bastion, the last true fortress of their dying empire, the military world of Draenix Prime. It was where the last Dominion admirals had gathered, where the remnants of their war fleets were regrouping. If the humans could take Draenix Prime, the war would be over. But the Dominion was desperate. They knew they were losing, and desperate enemies were the most dangerous ones. As the human fleet prepared for the final assault, a Dominion warlord emerged from the shadows, a being known only as High Executor Vorel. Unlike the others who had fled or surrendered, Vorel had no intention of retreating. He had one final plan, one last act of defiance. He was going to wipe out Earth. The Dominion had never destroyed Earth outright because they had needed it as a resource world, as a breeding ground for new slaves, but now, with humanity on the verge of victory, Vorel saw only one path. If he could not rule over humans, he would exterminate them. He gathered every remaining warship, every last Dominion soldier willing to fight, and set course for humanity's homeworld. The war was not over. The final battle was about to begin. The Dominion's last warlord, High Executor Vorel, had nothing left to lose. His empire was in ruins, his fleet scattered, his leaders dead or in hiding, but he did not care. He had one purpose now, one final mission: to erase humanity from existence. A massive Dominion armada, the last remnants of their once mighty war machine, emerged from the darkness of space. Their target was clear: Earth, the birthplace of the rebellion, the heart of the species that had defied them for too long. If humanity was to rise, then Vorel would ensure they had no home to return to. Daniel Voss watched the incoming transmissions in silence. He had expected the Dominion to make a final stand at Draenix Prime. Instead, they had done something far worse. They had bypassed the war zone entirely, going straight for the one thing humanity could not afford to lose: their homeworld. Elaine Carter's voice cut through the chaos: we won't make it in time. The human fleets were too far away, too spread out from the ongoing liberation campaigns. There was no way they could regroup and reach Earth before the Dominion fleet arrived, and Earth's defenses, though strengthened since the rebellion began, were nowhere near enough to withstand an all-out assault from a desperate Dominion force. Daniel clenched his fists. He refused to let it end like this. After everything they had fought for, after everything they had won, he would not allow the Dominion to have the last word. We changed the rules, he said. Elaine, I need you to find me a way to get there faster. Elaine's mind raced through every possibility. Then an idea struck, one so insane it had never been attempted before. The Dominion's own warp gate network still had functioning relays. Despite the AI's destruction, some of the automated systems were still operational. If they could hijack the right one, they might be able to force a direct jump to Earth. It was a gamble. If they miscalculated, the entire fleet could be lost in transit, but if they didn't try, Earth was doomed. Daniel didn't hesitate to do it. The fleet moved at full speed toward the nearest Dominion gate. Elaine and her team worked relentlessly, overriding the security protocols, forcing the ancient machinery to bend to their will. The Dominion had spent centuries ensuring no one else could use their technology. Now that arrogance would cost them everything. As the last sequence was locked in, Daniel sent one final transmission to Earth: "Hold the line, we are coming." Then the fleet jumped. The Dominion armada arrived over Earth expecting an easy slaughter, but humanity had learned to fight even with outdated weapons and limited ships. Earth's defenders met them head-on, refusing to kneel a second time. Civilian ships turned into makeshift war vessels, orbital stations repurposed into weapons platforms. Every gun on the planet fired into the void, determined to take as many Dominion warships as possible before the inevitable end. And then the sky ripped open. The human fleet burst forth from the stolen warp gate, arriving in the middle of the battle. The impossible had happened. Humanity had outmaneuvered the Dominion using their own technology against them. Daniel wasted no time. All ships engaged, no survivors. The battle for Earth began. It was chaos. Dominion warships outnumbered the human fleet, but they were disorganized, desperate. The humans had something they never did: purpose, unity, rage. Every Dominion warship that fell was another piece of vengeance for the centuries of suffering humanity had endured. Elaine led cyber warfare strikes, disabling Dominion capital ships from within, turning their own weapons against them. Daniel's flagship cut through enemy lines, carving a path of destruction toward Voral's command vessel. The High Executor refused to retreat. He had come to end humanity, and he would not leave until either he or Daniel was dead. The two warships collided in a final brutal exchange of fire. Fighters swarmed through the wreckage, soldiers boarding the enemy flagship in a desperate struggle for victory. Daniel led the charge, personally fighting through Dominion corridors until he reached the command bridge. Voral waited, a towering figure clad in battle armor, his crimson eyes filled with hatred. "You were born to kneel," he growled, "and I was born to rule." Daniel raised his weapon. "Not anymore." The last duel of the war began. Blades clashed, weapons fired. Voral was stronger, faster, but Daniel was relentless. He had fought his entire life for this moment. Every fallen human, every lost world, every scar fueled his fury. He dodged, he countered, he struck again and again, until finally, with one last brutal blow, he drove his blade through Voral's chest. The High Executor staggered, choking on his own blood, staring at the human who had defied an empire. His final words were filled with disbelief. "This is not how it was meant to be." Daniel ripped his blade free. "No, but this is how it ends." Voral fell. The last leader of the Dominion was dead. With their commander gone, the remaining Dominion forces collapsed. Ships surrendered, soldiers laid down their arms. Some tried to flee, but they were hunted down one by one. Humanity showed no mercy. The last battle was over. Earth had survived. And the Dominion was no more. The war was over. The Dominion was gone. The last of their warlords executed, their fleets shattered, their empire nothing but a fading memory. For the first time in history, humanity was free, no longer slaves, no longer the lowest rung of the galaxy. They were something else now, something more. Daniel Voss stood on the bridge of his warship, looking at the stars that had once belonged to their oppressors. Now they were humanity's future. The Dominion had ruled through fear and cruelty. Now their worlds lay abandoned, their monuments toppled, their species scattered, leaderless, broken. The galaxy was forever changed. Elaine Carter watched as the final transmissions came in, reports of Dominion holdouts surrendering, of former slave worlds rising up to claim their independence. The rebellion had been more than just a fight for survival. It had become a revolution, one that had inspired others across the stars. Some of the freed species looked to humanity for leadership, others wanted to rule themselves. But one thing was clear: the age of the Dominion was over. But victory came at a cost. Entire human colonies had been wiped out, millions had died in the struggle. Earth itself bore the scars of war, its cities still rebuilding from the devastation of Voral's final assault. Freedom had come, but it had been paid for in blood. As the remaining human fleets gathered, a question remained: what now? Daniel turned to Elaine. "We have the power to take everything: the Dominion's former territories, their fleets, their technology. We could rule the galaxy." Elaine studied him for a long moment. "That's what they did." She let the words hang in the air. "Are we really going to become what we fought against?" Daniel thought about the worlds they had liberated, the people who had suffered, the species that had never known anything but fear. He had spent his entire life fighting. He didn't know what peace even looked like, but he knew one thing: humanity would never be slaves again. He finally spoke. "We don't rule, we lead." And so the decision was made. The shattered remains of the Dominion were divided among the freed world. Some chose independence, some formed alliances. Humanity did not force its will upon them, but those who sought to enslave others, those who sought to rebuild the old ways, learned the hard way that the humans would never allow another Dominion to rise. Earth became the heart of a new order, not an empire, but a force, a power that would ensure no species suffered as humanity had suffered. The galaxy had learned to fear humans, but now they would learn to respect them. As the last Dominion banners were burned, Daniel and Elaine stood together watching a new dawn rise over Earth. This was not the end, this was the beginning. Humanity had risen from the ashes of slavery, not just as survivors, not just as warriors, but as conquerors of their own destiny.